Welcome to GTN Coaches Corner, a very special one because as you can see, I have a very special guest, Dan Lorang, coach of Haug and many more, well, Frodeno and a large list of pros. Dan, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm afraid you're going to be doing the hard work. I'm going to be asking the questions that our lovely viewers have sent in, and you are hopefully going to be sharing your knowledge with us. So yeah, we've got plenty to crack on with. You guys are in for a treat. So our first question here is obviously a little bit based around the fact that you've had a huge success with Haug. You've been coaching her for years, and she's now in her early 40s, am I right in saying? So this question is, we're seeing many pros performing at their best in their late 30s and early 40s. How different would their training look now to what it did 10 years ago? And if you were to set them a program for 10 years' time, how would it look different in the future?
To be honest, when they want to compete really at the highest level, there is not so much difference. So it's not that they're doing less or less intensity. What we have to take care of is about the recovery. So probably I would say we look a little bit more about recovery time, so that it's not just all about volume, about intensity, but really see where is the best place to put the recovery. For example, after races, having some more recovery days than perhaps 10 years ago. And also, for example, in the run, not going really to the absolute limit in terms of volume and intensity, because running is the sport with the biggest impact. Mm-hmm. And probably it's also the sport where you can get the biggest injuries. On the bike and the swim, that's not happening. So that is a little bit of difference. But if I would now speak to age groupers, I think this point is really, really crucial because especially when they are working, so they get a little bit older, they work, 8 to 10 hours per day, and they do sport on a quite high level, their recovery is key. So there it's better just to skip a session and just recover. Then the idea is always, with a better recovery, your body can also get at a better performance level. And then the next session will be better, and with a higher quality session, also the outcome will be better.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense just to accumulate hours. And if these hours are just like, if you're always tired, then it just makes no sense. So I think that is the main point. Look at your recovery and probably stepping back a little bit from running, so a little bit decreasing. Yeah. I would call it the load from running, not intensity or volume, but more the overall.
The overall,
load.
So it's either intensity and less long, or a little bit longer, less intensity.
Exactly. And probably just the last point, what gets more and more important when you get older is the strength training.
Yeah.
So endurance, we know it from studies, can even sometimes peak when you get older, but and then decrease really slowly. Mm-hmm. But muscle mass go down quite quickly, and that's why it's important. The older you get, the more important gets strength training in your overall training.
And so, do you put that into the program of the pros that you're coaching that are a little bit
older?
For
sure, it's at least 2 times a week when we talk about real strength training, and then. Yeah, basically every second day doing some kind of stability training. So they are doing this. And if I look now how consistent they are doing it compared to 10 years ago, I think there it's even now more consistent. Okay. So it's more, I would say it's a higher quality there.
Yeah, I think it's so often overlooked, and it is hard when you're training for 3 sports if you are balancing a job and things. But it's interesting to hear it from you. Okay, the next question comes from P. Zella2. It says, training for my first 140.6 and following a prescribed 80/20 plan, but it uses a day of the week calendar and I don't work normal Monday to Friday. To complicate it more, once a week I have to do an extra shift, which is 10 till 6 through the night. The next day, I'm pretty tired. That's not really a surprise. They say staying active helps, but I often can't give full effort. My plan gives me 1 rest day a week that I have to put the rest day on another day when I work a 12+ hour shift at work and can't get the training in. Any suggestion for training on days with limited or no sleep the night prior? So that links us quite nicely to the last one you were talking about.
Especially, exactly, because sleep, so where do you get the best recovery? The best recovery your body gets during sleep. So if you are not able to sleep enough hours, the recovery is not so good. Mm-hmm. And basically from there comes that it makes absolutely no sense to put after a night of a bad sleep or just a 1 or 2 hour sleep, a hard session. So the only thing what you should do and could do is on a day like this, just go out for an easy run, 30 minutes, or an easy ride, 1 hour, or an easy swim around 30 minutes. Really easy, just recovering. Because then you support your body to recover, basically to get a little bit what you didn't get in the night.
Yeah.
So that is also something what we know, and also a really important point with professionals, because it's just not about performance, but also about health. Because if you don't recover well during the night, also your immune system is more vulnerable, and you can just get sick or just getting a small cold, and then basically you lose more than one day. Yeah. Probably you lose 3 or 4 a week. So in these situations, please, just recover. Yeah. Active recovery, it's not that you have just to lie in bed, but active recovery, also this works normally better than so just lying in bed.
Yeah, you feel better. No, I think it's so easy to sit here and say it, isn't it? But if you are that person, you want to be not missing training, but it's looking at the big picture.
Yeah, and also here he prescribed, he said, okay, his plan says, but normally the plan should be adapted to his situation. So if they've just
got a plan, they should change it. Yeah.
That's why he can say, okay, probably it's a good plan, a good basic plan, but I have to adapt it to my personal situation.
Exactly.
And then it's good, then it's fine.
Great, thank you. Now we have Zach Clark says, I'm a time-crunched athlete, mostly training for half-iron distance. Is there a science as to when in the season to prescribe VO2 intervals versus threshold workouts? I've always felt it was a bit arbitrary. I've typically done VO2 in the early season, threshold later season, but wondering if it would be better to mix and match. Now, I feel this is a question you could go quite deep on. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, exactly. We could talk about it in 1 hour. But
we have to keep it concise,
but just try to make it short. So first of all, it depends on your metabolic profile. So which type of athletes are you? Is VO2 max, for example, a weak point from you? So should you start quite early in the season to work on it? Or do you, for example, have a high anaerobic capacity, what you don't want to grow because you're doing triathlon, but you want to work on decreasing that? So basically, when I work with my professionals, I have a similar approach. So when I would say I have now 10 guys or women, with a lot of them, I have this approach. Also working on short stuff at the beginning of the season, and then going more to threshold work, to more specific work towards the race. But, and there's no but, it's not with everybody with this. So if I have an athlete who has already a high VO2, but also a high anaerobic system, the risk if you do VO2 max training is also that you dig a little bit in this anaerobic system. And then you increase your VO2 max, but also the anaerobic system. And it takes some time to lower, for example, lactate building rate. That is one of the parameters what we're talking about. So probably with one athlete, I have to start earlier with this one. And then just going to the races like we know it from the past, from a tapering strategy, then coming with this high intensity stuff. So, but what to finish this off, what I find quite sexy with this approach is, for example, if you go for running and you do 200 meters reps, it's always good to first try to run fast on a short distance than to try to run fast on 1K, 2K, 3K. And that's why I also like your approach, because you can more focusing on technique in race speed or even a little bit higher than race speed, and we make the steps bigger and bigger when you make the improvements over the weeks and over the month of training.
Okay, so you're almost extending the VO2 session or the threshold sessions you're talking about there.
Yeah, basically you start with short intervals, and basically you can do them on a higher intensity. That's why it's a VO2. But you are working on the technique, and then after, if you're doing longer intervals, it gets more threshold. It gets more threshold interval. But you can take what you learned from this technical training, from the short distance, and then you try to copy-paste it to longer distance.
That makes sense. I just have one more sort of clarifying question around that. So he's saying that it seems quite arbitrary, but you're saying for the, if you didn't know this athlete and they couldn't do testing, that actually doing more VO2 stuff earlier and then into threshold later is a good idea for them.
And probably we should also say it's not now about doing every session a VO2 max session.
Thanks for clarifying.
And also you need the other corner. So basically when I do this, I try to train a little bit more polarized. So we have VO2 max sessions. But on the other side, all the other sessions are quite easy. Just easy, a little bit some volume on the easy session. So not that you say you do now 5 VO2 max sessions and then the next a session on zone 2 or whatever. No, then it's focusing on this session, and all the rest is just easy training.
Cool. Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's really important. Now we have this one from Unit, lots of numbers, 1337, IS, etc. I just did a cycling session where I did a 20-minute FTP rep, I presume effort, then settled into 90 minutes at zone 2. My question is, will this session give me the benefits of both? And is it a good way to simulate fatigue from a long race without doing a 5-hour ride, which I enjoy but don't always have time to do?
Yeah. I think this is now quite specific. So somebody really thought about how could I simulate fatigue
because in less time.
Yeah, that's because that's mainly also a limiting factor in a race. It's nice if you can push a high 20-minute FTP at the beginning, but what happens after 2 or 3 hours? So that's why I like the approach. You say, okay, what do I really need in racing? And what you have here is, so after the 20-minute FTP test, your VO2 uptake is already quite high because you bring your body to the limit. And even if it goes a little bit down during the recovery, and then you go to zone 2, so even this zone 2 training will be on a little bit higher level. So you will need more oxygen during this zone 2 training. So it's a quite demanding training.
Yeah, it sounds it.
If you get enough carbs, if it was the goal to train what he talking about there, I would say, yes, why not trying it? Why not doing it? You just, like I say, you have to eat enough carbs and you really have to put it in your training schedule as a really hard session. So you need recovery after and probably it will be that you just have one intensive bike session in that week when you do this because it's quite demanding, but there's nothing to talk against it because it's not that we now mix some anaerobic stuff with some zone 2. No, it's quite... If you do 20 minutes FTP, you do this a little bit over threshold, and you combine this with zone 2, so you can do this.
And sort of a question off the back of that. So, what would another example be, or how else could another athlete? Is there a generic way of trying to simulate that fatigue in less than 5 hours? Because most of our viewers don't have 5 hours regularly.
Basically, a common way is also to do a little bit more of this zone 2 training. So you would do, for example, I don't know. 2 or 3 times 20 minute or even 30 minute zone 2 training. And then you try on the last one to have your highest power. So basically an increasing wattage. And the goal is there to be able to mobilize also at the end of a race, at least of the bike part, the performance. Also when you see the dynamic now in racing, Kona, for example, is a good thing there. Often their last attack happens around 30k to go, 40k to go, but you also have to be able to mobilize that, to be able to use your carbohydrates and be able to, before, save your carbohydrate source by using more fat. And that is what you can train like this. You can also play a little bit with nutrition, but then it gets more specific. So you could a little bit try to not always give all the carbs to your body what they need. So play a little bit. But this is then, there I would more recommend talk to an expert about
that sounds
how to
like
do it.
We're into another field with that one. Okay, great, thank you. Now we have...
probably one thing, I don't want to forget, also you can use some strength training to simulate fatigue.
Yes, okay. What do you mean on the bike? So
in front. For example, you do some squat training in front of the bike training to simulate already some muscular fatigue. Because the muscular fatigue is the main problem. It's not that your metabolism or your heart gets fatigue, it's more the muscle. So you can...
And that would be like literally finish your session, have something to eat and get on the bike?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I like that one. Cool, thank you. Gil Gavira comes in with this one. I come from a swimming and running background. Looking at my performance during the first couple of triathlons, I say aerobic fitness is okay. I'm struggling to get power and speed on the bike. So we've got another bike question here. Even at very high perceived efforts, my heart rate stays low. Could you recommend training and exercise to improve strength on the bike? Now, this might overlap a little bit with what we've just been talking about, but I think maybe more of a beginner level. The question is always, is it really that you are missing strength on the bike? So there we would have to go a little bit deeper in analyzing, but let's say it's the case. So what can you do? One thing is to work with high torques. For example, you go on the bike, you do a session like 2 times, 5 times 2 minutes, where you go really with around 40 RPM, so really low cadence. And the intensity is around the threshold. So it's quite nearly a non-aerobic task, but you try to simulate basically a strength training on the bike. It's normally I would start with, for example, 30 seconds, then 45, then 1 minute. So increasing the length of these intervals until 2 minutes, where you're doing this exercise, and you also have to focus that you're using the right muscles. Often amateurs make the mistake that they try to use their quads, basically, but it's about using the glutes also on the bike, because it's our biggest muscle what we have, to activate the glutes in a good way. And so that could help. And do you have any tips for that other than sort of activation off the bike? But when you're on the bike, is it more of a just conscious, or is it a bike fit?
A good tip here is that you do some core training, for example, where you activate already your glutes. There are easy exercises you can look in the internet.
We've got lots of videos on that.
So that you basically, when you jump on the bike, you feel your glutes.
Okay.
And then you feel, now I'm activating it. And also there, if you have problems, I would also recommend going to a physiotherapist at least once, that he can check if the glutes are really firing. Because sometimes after a crash, for example, and also the hamstrings, a good point. Because sometimes after a crash or some other event, your muscles are not able to fire in the same way. And a good physiotherapist can really detect it and then can tell you, hey, we first have to work on this before you start now the big strength program.
Yeah.
You can also try to work with gym training, but it's always 50-50 if you really can use the strengths what you gain in the gym on the bike.
Okay.
That is nothing natural because the body gets better in what he's doing.
Yeah.
And if you do squats, it doesn't mean that you now can use that force really on the bike. It can.
Yeah.
But
maybe later on down the line, maybe for this person.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks. We've just got 2 final questions. This one from Tom Pelton says, got my first half Ironman coming up in almost 2 months in Maine in USA. The bike is my worst discipline by a considerable margin, as I can comfortably cover the run and swim. Would it be smart to prioritize the bike during these last few training cycles? And I don't know how long their cycle is, and if so, how would you recommend going about it? Currently have 2 bikes, 2 runs, plus an extra brick run, and 2 swims. Worried my fitness will regress if I specialize too much on the bike.
I would say yes, that works. So we know that if you're focusing on, so you have 3 disciplines. If you're focusing just on 1 or 2, the improvements can be faster.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, I would recommend to skip 1 swim session, because to do just 1 run per week is, in my opinion, not enough to keep the stimulus.
Yeah.
To have the muscle adaptation. In the swim, it's possible if you have some background there.
Yes.
So I would recommend to him during, I don't know how much time.
2 months.
2 months, at least a block of 3 weeks to do this.
Okay.
So just skipping 1 swim session for 1 bike session, and probably can, now it depends a little bit on the intensity distribution, but probably to have at least 1 really long bike session, then 1 really hard one, and then in the third one, we would have to see about the intensity distribution. But at least just doing 1 more session with some quality can help him, and the body responds quite well on this. We see this often when runners can, for example, when triathletes can, for example, not run because they are injured, that they improve in the other disciplines and much faster. And at the moment when you take the run again, then you see, now in the bike here I'm not moving forward. So it seems that it takes some energy from your body to improve in 1 discipline.
Okay, no, that's interesting. I should probably take a leaf out of that book and do a bit more cycling. Right, our final question has been running for 13 years, done 150 half marathons, oh my gosh, and 37 marathons. Okay, I think it's fair to say they've done a lot of running. And then they basically go on to say, recently they've done a sprint duathlon, a 5K run, a 20K bike, and a 5K run. Legs are tired, but completed it in just over 2 hours. Still do strength training, running hills, and 4 lots of pace runs, etc. But want to incorporate duathlon into my weekly plan. Any advice? So, 68-year-old, basically coming from a running background, wants to start to incorporate cycling. I mean, it's quite a wide question, that one. But what advice would you have?
Basically, I think to increase aerobic work, so to increase the workload or hold the workload, it's good to incorporate the bike training, because he rides duathlon. So what I would not see as a big benefit is really to make some kind of brick run. So say really I run, I go on the bike and I run again, because the impact is quite high. So transition runs, brick runs, they are really, really massively have a big impact on the bones, on the muscle.
Yeah.
And I think it's not necessary in his case. If he's not really doing triathlon, but just running, then I would say, hey, use the bike for increased training time. You can even do some intensity on the bike. Yeah. For example, doing some VO2 max session on the bike, it's no problem at all.
Okay.
But I would not recommend it as to combine it really as a duathlon.
Okay.
But just say, okay, probably like I say, for example, a VO2 max session on the bike, probably look, how can I do this? I don't know, with 30-30s, 40-20s or whatever. The risk of injury there is really low.
Yes.
And also when you say, hey, doing every week 1 long bike ride around 5 hours, sometimes even to replace a long run, or even to have, for example, doing on Saturday a long run and on Sunday this long bike ride could have a quite big impact on their aerobic endurance and help him to improve.
Yeah,
still
cool.
in that age.
I like that. I like those nice little snippets you gave us there. I mean, I could ask questions all day long, lots of my own, but obviously we are prioritising our viewers, Dan. So thank you so much for answering them. Quite a mixture. I know I chose quite a few bike-related ones with your, with your cycle coaching background, but won't take any more of your time because I know you've got a very important day. We are filming this ahead of Challenge Roth, so you've got your fingers crossed on Sunday for Haug, haven't you?
Yeah, that's why I'm here, and fingers crossed also to the spectators. For sure, we'll have a really interesting race, fast race in the men and in the women field. Yeah. Most of the best athletes of the world are here, so I think it will be really exciting for the spectators.
Well, we're lucky to have caught you beforehand. Thank you so much for your time and good luck.
We are welcome.
Cheers.